Thank you. It is now my pleasure and a privilege to turn the session over to Grace Kruniken, who is the Dynamic General Manager and CEO at BART. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you and welcome to our session. I like to just get started directly, but I'm going to take just a moment to thank some people that really deserve our gratitude. And first, I'd like to just tell you about who made this whole thing happen. And I want to acknowledge three people. But the boots on the ground person was Lynn Morrison. Where is Lynn? Is she here? She's right here. Lynn has been with APTA for 13 years, and prior to that, she had her own company for about 20 years. She's been in the industry for a long time. She started with RTD in Sacramento, and she is retiring, and this is her last event, and she has said when she walks out the door, that's it. So I want you all to give not just a courteous welcome, but a big thank you to Lynn for being with APTA all these years and helping all of us. She put on the content of every conference. Thank you, Lynn, and good luck in your retirement. She told me on the way in she wished she'd read the book 69 years ago when she started in the industry. I don't know what, she looks like she's 5. So next, I want to thank the person that made this happen in terms of suggesting it to APTA and thinking about it. About a year ago, we were in Los Angeles with the WTS Los Angeles chapter doing a session for them. And I had the opportunity to sit right next to Doran Barnes, who is now our APTA president. But Doran's the one that said, I'm going to call Michael Milanofi, and ask him if we can't make this at a session of ours. And Doran, thank you very much, and congratulations on your presidency. And the last person I want to thank is really the first, which is the sponsor. And I know it said Parsons up on top, but Janet Walker Ford has been, and I heard them referred to as the first family earlier today, Nat and Jan. I thought that was pretty on target. Janet has been such a supporter of ours. She's now on the WTS National Board, and she's been a booster of ours. And I know that the reason we have a lovely sponsor today is because of you. So Janet, thank you personally for this. Now we're going to get straight to it. I'm going to introduce our panel. First is Liz Levin. Liz Levin graduated from Wellesley College. She then went to work for HUD in New York City. She then went down to D.C. and was an employee of the Redevelopment Land Agency in D.C., moved up to Massachusetts, where she started with the Department of Community Affairs in the city of Boston, and then went in 1972 to work for Metcalf and Eddy, and it was an engineering firm at the time, and Liz was the first planner that they had work there, so she was cutting her teeth, the first female professional as well. Then she helped form Rizzo Associates in Boston, had her own company, Liz Levin and Company. She has served on many boards, including MassDOT and the MBTA board, and she's been the national president of WTS, and she's my partner in crime on the book. Please welcome Liz Levin. Next, we have Dana Hook. And Dana Hook was raised in Indiana. She graduated in engineering from Purdue. Her first engineering job was with the Indiana Department of Highways. It took her 15 years to raise her kids. She has 4 children. And during that time, she got her MBA at Butler. She taught economics both at Butler and then at Pima Community College in Tucson. She reinvented herself, or re-entered her career again at Pima County when she was hired there. And 21 years after she received her degree, she got her PE in engineering, or I guess it's redundant, sorry about that. And she then went to work for HNTB, and she now works for CDM Smith. She's Vice President of CDM Smith. Please welcome Dana Hook. Our next speaker needs no introduction at APTA. We just know her as the Queen of Transit. I guess that makes Bev the princess, I'm not sure. But Beverly Scott is also in the audience, who's in the book, and I'm sure she'll inject herself at some point. But Shirley began her career in transportation at the MBTA, working on streetcars. She moved to Washington, D.C. as the manager of bus services and rose to become the assistant general manager for bus services. And then in 88 and 89, she managed the rail system. From there, she went to DART as the deputy executive director. In 1990, she became the executive director at New Jersey Transit, and she couldn't hold herself back. She became the CEO of Houston Metro. And later, she had her own consulting firm, and now she considers herself a recovering GM, I doubt it, and a tourist. Please welcome Shirley DeLibero. The next person went from being secretary to being secretary a couple of times. She was hired as a secretary at ADOT, which is Arizona DOT, in 1985 as a contracts administrator. She rose up to be the deputy director of administration, then the deputy director of the whole department, and she was appointed director of all of Arizona DOT by Governor Jane Hull. In 2001, President Bush appointed her as administrator of FHWA, and then in 2006, she was appointed by President Bush as Secretary of U.S. Department of Transportation. She's now the president of Mary E. Peters Consulting Group, LLC, and on the board of directors of HDR. Please welcome Mary Peters. So let's just jump right in here. We have a book that has 18 chapters in it because we've interviewed 18 women, and this is just a sampling. As I mentioned before, Bev is also in the audience. But I want you to begin, if you would, by describing why and how you got into the transportation industry, and if you would, describe where you were with your family at that time, because our book is really trying to explain the connection between, it's the whole person. It's a look at the whole person. By the way, I should say, if we offend any of you today, we're very sorry at the beginning. I'll just give you that apology. And it's not just for Shirley. So with that, I'd like you to let's start with you, Mary.
Sure.
We won't go down the line on everyone, but let's start with you.
Well, just quickly, Grace, I think I probably was destined to be in transportation because the summer out of high school, I worked out at Luke Air Force Base in the 45th 10th Transportation Squadron. That was more about getting people in the military and their household goods where they needed to be. But I took a hiatus, had a family, and then in 1984, I had an opportunity to go back to transportation, joining the Arizona Department of Transportation, as you said, as a small S secretary. And worked my way up through that organization, learned a lot about things during the ensuing years. And as you said, I was blessed to have other positions later on. But starting out, I think at an entry level, right after they had passed a half-cent sales tax issue, so we had to hit the ground running, literally and figuratively, to make that happen. So I kind of sipped water out of a fire hose learning, but it was a great opportunity.
So where were you with your family when you started to work? How many kids?
When I started with Arizona DOT, three children, then the youngest was 6. And by the way, I was also going back to college to finish my degree during that time as well. So the youngest was 6 years old, and the other 2 were 12 and 7.
Okay. Shirley.
I got into transportation totally by accident. I didn't get into the transportation industry till I was 39 years old. And the reason I got into it is I was a product line rep for digital when the computers were, the CPUs were the size of this room. Mm-hmm. And I was working with marketing and I was traveling a lot. And I was divorced and had 2 kids. And my mother was taking care of the kids when I was traveling. And she gave me an ultimatum. She said, you have got to find a job here in Boston where you stay and take care of your children. I'm the grandmother, you're the mother. So needless to say, at that time, Boston, Dukakis was the governor, and he was really pushing to get more women into the transit industry. And I interviewed, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, because that was real cool. I interviewed and got the job, and that's how I got in transportation, and that was in 1976, and those of you from Boston or know Boston know that at that time it was very white, male, Catholic, Irish. The only thing I had going for me was I was a Catholic. So I knew all the while I was there I was never going to change my religion, but that's how I got into it.
That's great.
Why don't we just take a minute, even though, just tell them about the interview, because this tells you a little bit. We all know Shirley now, but she was exactly the same back then. Tell them how you got the job.
Well, the guy that I interviewed was the superintendent of the Green Line in Boston, and they ran the trackless trolleys out of Cambridge and the Green Line. And he was the superintendent, was a retired colonel and had been in aviation and in the Air Force and worked on the President One plane. And during the interview, I was talking about all my transferable skills and how I could do this job. And then he told me, he says, well, you don't know anything about streetcars. And I said, well, you know, no offense, but neither did you. I mean, you came from aviation and you learned it. And right at that time, the chief mechanical officer walked in right as I was saying, no offense to you. And so he walked me to the car after the interview. And I could tell the interview did not go well, so I didn't think I was going to get the job. But the chief mechanical officer walked me to my car, and he said to me, you got a lot of moxie. He said, I can't believe what you said to him. I said, well, it's true. I mean, I can read schematics, so I can learn streetcars. And I said to him, and you're his boss. He said, well, I don't think he's going to hire you. I said, you're his boss. You make it happen. I said, do you think I can do it? And he said, yes, I think you can. But give me 2 weeks. That was, those of you who knew Dick Goodlatte, no, he's no longer on this earth, but he was my mentor for many years. So he walks me to the car, and he says, I'll call you in a couple of weeks. Well, 2 weeks came and went. I never heard from him, so I called him up. And I said, so what about this job? He said, he definitely does not want you. I said, well, do you think I can do it? He said, absolutely, I think you can, but it would be tough working for someone who really doesn't want you. I said, I can handle it. I'll have a meeting out of my hands. Don't worry about it. So I did get hired. I never got a meeting out of my hands, eating my hands on several occasions, but not out of it. And I got the job, and it was hilarious. A year later, he had screwed the budget up so bad, I got his job. So.
So this book is targeted at sort of the people at the end of their 20s and in their 30s. And so just to translate, the way she offended him in the interview, that's not what we're recommending in the book. However, gutsy was there. You ought to be gutsy. She got a mentor out of the deal, and she did that because there was a direct communication, someone she communicated with, and she has persistence, which is her middle name. So we want you to take all those lessons. All right, let's move on to Dana Hook.
Great. Well, when I graduated from engineering school at Purdue University, and you were interviewing, one of the things that fascinated me about the transportation was the Indiana Department of Transportation, I think it was the Department of Highways at the time, was such a complex system about how you get everything to work together, not about the engineering like making sure water runs downhill and that cars stay in between the curbs. It was the systems part, and so my first job was with the Indiana Department of Transportation. But at that time, when my husband and I, we started our family, we were making a decision about, okay, now what do we do with children? And he made $200 more than I did a year, and so he was also an engineer, and so I stayed home, and we had 4 children, and I stayed home for 15 years. So I really entered again into transportation when I was 39 years old. And,
Right? We have that in common.
Right, and my children were now the 6 through 15 years of age, and it was, and I was interviewing, I was living in Tucson, and I interviewed at the Pima County Department of Transportation. Again, at an entry level, I had an engineering degree, but no professional license. And so here I am interviewing to be I laid traffic hoses, took traffic counts for the transportation department and the traffic engineering. And so here I am at this first interview, and they were asking questions that, as long as they were like common sense, okay, but when they asked things that were very specific about signaling and those things that I might have forgotten in 15 years. I had no idea about. But the supervisor had gone to Purdue University, and so he thought I might know something. And that's how I got that next job and stayed in that entry level until I could get licensed, sit for the PE 4 years later, and pass the professional engineering license.
So you kind of glossed over something I want you to pull out because I know your story, Dana. Would you so when you were home, you made it sound like for 15 years you were just at home raising the children, and I already by the bio introduced you as having secured your master's in the meantime. Right. And tell them a little bit about how you got that first job, how easy it was. These folks are up here, and you see, professionals that look glossy and all put together and successful. And I know there's people in the audience thinking that, particularly younger ones, gee, I'm never going to get there, and they're all put together, and I'm not. I know there's a few of you. Give them your personal situation when you found that job and how you had to get that job at Pima County, how you got the job and how easy it was.
Right. So in the meantime, my husband and I had divorced, and I was in a relationship with a woman, and now my wife, then partner. And so my husband and his new wife and me and Chris were raising 4 children. And it took me 2 years, actually, to get that first interview to even start at a beginning level in Tucson, new to a community, this 15-year gap. I started back taking master's degree classes online for engineering to try to get the brain cells going. I had lots of applications in. My former husband, who wrote a letter to almost everybody that I applied to, saying, this person will be a great engineer. So I had great support from my family for getting into there, but it still took 2 years to get a full-time job. I was working part-time at Pima Community College, teaching computers and mathematics. I started taking auto classes. The world changed between 1980 and 1998 about AutoCAD and all those things that are different in our profession, if you can imagine. And so independently, I was taking all these classes, getting all these things, talking to anybody that I can, and figuring out how to continue to support 4 children, one approaching college and needing a good job to help them.
And it's my understanding that to get the job, you were getting no callbacks, so you were moved from your application, an important fact.
Oh yes, that master's degree, it came off the resume. That was never going to interest anyone, that you were an MBA and you were having to apply for entry-level jobs. So when I was home with kids, you do all kinds of things to keep active. And I put together an entire math enrichment program for the school district we were living in and got that started and funded and those kinds of things that you could add to the community. But none of that really mattered as you were trying to go get a job back in transportation engineering at the time. And so take that off the resume and just talk. I have a bachelor's degree from Purdue University, and that got me the entry-level job.
Okay, let's move on to risk-taking. Because as you've heard, they've overcome some difficult situations. But in your career, if you could describe for the audience, and let's say this time you're talking to a 32-year-old person that's thinking, oh, it's going along, it's a pretty good job, I'm not sure I want to risk this. What advice have you got for the folks out there about risk-taking? And if you could talk about the role risk-taking played in your career and your advancement particularly.
Sure, Grace. I think the example that I would like to give you all is when I was working at the Arizona Department of Transportation in engineering consulting services. And we had a newly adopted public-private partnership law in Arizona. And so there were 3 of us that did procurement activities, myself, hiring engineers and architects, the head of procurement that bought, we call it the widgets and everything else, and then the construction contracting officer. And the 3 of us were called into the office of the director at the time and asked, we need to put some wheels on this thing, get it running. And the other 2 couldn't get out of the room fast enough. So I was both slower to get out of the room, but also really excited about taking that opportunity to build that program. And in doing so, even though it was later a spectacular failure in terms of implementing a public-private partnership at that time, I got to know the director, I got to know the State Transportation Board, members of the state legislature, and many others who were really important in terms of advancing transportation. And I'll leave you all who are coming up through the ranks with this thought. And it's something my father would say to me when I was younger. He said, life is like a merry-go-round. I often think he was Forrest Gump's father as well. He just never told us that he was his. But he said, life is like a merry-go-round. And you remember the old merry-go-rounds where you would grab a ring each time you went past. And if you got the gold ring, you got a new ride, a second ride as well. He said, grab a ring every chance you get. You never know if it's going to be the gold ring or not. So taking those chances, that was something, again, that didn't work out as well as we would like in terms of the results. But the fact that we tried and got a lot of things done gave me exposure that later led my ability to run the department and later to go to USDOT.
I'm going to go to Shirley next and then to Liz, and a little twist later. Shirley.
I think the biggest risk I took was when I went and interviewed for the job for New Jersey Transit. I mean, I don't think I was ready for that job. I didn't think anyway, but I did a great job. But, you know, I contemplated Tom Downs, who I have to give him a lot of credit, was also my mentor. Tom Downs was responsible for me. He was on the board of directors at WMATA when I was the assistant general manager. And he told me about his buddy in Dallas who was becoming the CEO and looking for a deputy, convinced me I ought to go and interview. So I did. I interviewed and got the job in Dallas. Then we had a major referendum. We were trying to build a rail. As you know, it's now 90 miles, thanks to Gary Thomas, who's added all these miles. But we fought like hell to get the bill passed. We lost tremendously on that first referendum. Then Tom Downs became the Commissioner of Transportation for the state of New Jersey. He calls me up and he says, what do you think about coming to New Jersey? I'm like, you're out of your mind. I don't, running New Jersey Transit, and those of you who know, I think it's the third or the fourth largest transit property in the country. The whole state of New Jersey going to Philadelphia and service into New York. He said, well, come and interview. There's no guarantee that you'll get the job, but come and interview. So I did. I went and interviewed, and it was 5 men and me, so I figured I definitely didn't have that job. A woman, black and old. I think I was in my 40s then, late 40s. Early 50s, early 50s. I'm now 79, so I can't, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, let's hear for 79.
So anyway, I went and I interviewed, and I got the job, and it was the first day on the job. I walked in my office, I closed the door, and I'm praying to God, please, God, help me do this job. What the hell am I doing here? But it was very successful, and so that's a risk take that I always tell people that, go for it. When you think about it, when I sat there in the office that day and said, I may not have all the skills, but neither did some of the men I worked for. So, and they were in top jobs, so I figured I can do it. It's a risk. So take risks. Mm-hmm. If you wait to have every skill possible, you'll never get anywhere. So I did, and I have to say New Jersey Transit was very successful. I think we won 5 APTA awards during my tenure, so it wasn't bad.
So just for those kind of keeping notes on the lessons in the book, and I notice when I interview folks coming in that there's a tendency, it's not an absolute rule by any means, but there's a tendency, if there's 5 key qualifications, if the men have 2, they think they're almost overqualified for the job, and they walk in and tell me so. And if the women come in, they're still a little nervous about the last one that they don't have, that they haven't had the experience on. And so for the women in the audience, I think this lesson is, and I'm not sure I'd be quite as far out on my skis as Shirley was when she took that job, but getting out there, and you don't have to, if you've done everything on that job, you should probably be stretching and reaching for a job that's going to have a little bit more experience to offer you that you're going to grow into. Each job you take, you need to grow into that job somewhat. You have to have enough to do a good job for the person you're working for, but you too on your career development need to have something where you're learning and you're advancing, your understanding of the world. So that's one lesson. And then from Mary, like myself, we've taken jobs cleaning up things to a large extent. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, taking the jobs that people don't want, or taking the jobs that are where the agency's in the tank in some fashion are not quite as strong as it should be. There's opportunity there, and you should speak up and look at that, and as well as assignments. If you've got, she took an unpopular assignment, but it allowed her to establish herself, and I really applaud that. And then last, Shirley noted, it's the network. She noted that Tom Downs called her, and that's because she knew Tom Downs and was working with her. And that's what WTS is, and that's really, most of the people in the book come from WTS. It's a networking opportunity, and so often you get the job because someone knows you, they know of you, and they make that connection. And so for the Leadership APTA, and to APTA for hosting Leadership APTA and having that a part of their program, I think that helps advance the industry, because you start in Leadership APTA with a network of 20 or 30 folks that you carry with you throughout your whole career. And that network are the people you call when you're in trouble, and it's also the people that you call when you're out thinking it's time for me to move on. Now, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just have really two thoughts about risk and then an example. And my two thoughts are, first, that risk is the other side of opportunity. So if you want the opportunity, you should know that the risk is just part of getting there. And that makes it, I think, a lot more comfortable. And then the second point about the risk is that I look at failure not as failure, but as a step in the right direction. Okay, so the risk isn't about failing. The risk is about taking a step, that you need to take where there could be a lot of reward. And the biggest risk I probably took was I worked at Metcalf & Eddy, which was a staid engineering firm. And I worked there for 13 years. I had 2 kids while I was there, and a quite interesting job. And I went with a boss who had started his own firm. He only had a few people when he recruited me to it. And I gave up, having the job and the title. I got a big title with him because he couldn't pay that much. But I gave up the salary and really a lot to go someplace where you had to have faith in yourself in order to succeed. And we grew a vibrant business, which we sold. It was a wonderful thing to do, and it was because I ignored all the people who told me I was crazy. And I followed the gut instinct and the opportunity, and could believe in the opportunity.
So let's explore that failure discussion. Dana, or anyone else, I'd be happy to hear from you. We've all either taken a job or had a project underway, or something happened that there was a failure. How did you work describe the situation and then work your way through it?
I took a position as I was trying to quickly rise through my first-time job at Pima County DOT. There was an opportunity to move up at a different level of engineering. So I moved over from the Department of Transportation to the flood control district, and to learn new skills and also to make more money. 4 children, college coming, that scenario back in the background. And I immediately started working as the first woman professional, which I'm sure several of us have that opportunity to call that at different times in the flood control department. And it didn't take me till the first staff meeting when I recognized that maybe I'd made a mistake. When the director, he said, okay, we need someone to take notes. We had a secretary, she said, I'll take the notes. He says, no, I was thinking it should be one of our professionals. One of the young men said, I'll take the notes. He said, no, I think it should be a woman. I got the hint. Okay, it takes me a while. Oh, that's me. Okay, fine, I will take the notes. But I went and talked to him afterwards and said, you know, this is the first time, but it's the last time that you're going to call me out as the note taker, as an engineer, because I am a woman. Well, that was my boundary, but he didn't want to keep that boundary. So I recognized that that was a mistake. I immediately started calling friends out in the private sector at consultants saying, you know, this is just not going to work because of these things, and went and found a position with a private consultant. I was then called in, though, by the supervisor of the department manager that I'd left very quickly, and they interviewed me as an exit interview, and they fired him the next month. So I...
Good.
And that supervisor was a woman. And so I found out that I had made a mistake, maybe chasing money, but not understanding who I was going to work for, but recognizing it early on and sticking with who I knew I was and going and find my next opportunity.
Mary?
Yeah, I think that those are very good lessons, Dana, and absolutely appropriate. I had a situation once at Arizona DOT. I became the deputy director of the agency, and there was a bit of a dust-up with the contracting community, the Association of General Contractors, and there was to be a meeting after work one evening at their offices, at the AGC offices, which weren't far from ADOT, and I was specifically told not to attend, specifically not invited to that meeting. Now, the deputy director is the COO of the organization, so if you're the chief operating officer, you better be involved in things like that. And I almost went. I was furious. I think my face was as red as my jacket. I was pretty furious about it. And I said something to Larry Bonine, who was the director at the time. But ultimately, I decided not to go to that meeting that night. And so the boys went over and had their meeting and did not, by the way, get things settled. But the next morning, I went to the president of the AGC's office, his own construction company, and sat across the table from him. And Dana, a little like you, I said, don't ever do that to me again. I said, don't ever exclude me from a meeting that I need to be part of in order to do my job. And at first he started well, little lady, we thought the language might get a little rough, in the meeting. And I said, look, I was raised by Marine, and I could turn your ears blue if I would like to turn your ears blue. I won't, but don't ever do that to me again. And I did it privately. I didn't make a big scene about it, but I did it privately. But he and I became friends, and I was never excluded from meetings again. So you do have to stand up for yourself. And, Dana, if things hadn't changed, I would have changed. I probably would have done something differently as well. But don't be afraid to push those boundaries, is the lessons learned, Grace, that I would say to our audience today. You're going to hit up on those situations from time to time. If I'm drinking coffee, I'm happy to make the coffee. I don't mind doing that. But don't exclude me from important meetings that I need to be part of. And so, again, it was a lessons learned there that worked out, I think, in the end, well.
I want to, Shirley, and then Liz.
I was just trying to think of failures.
Don't do that, sister. I'll tell you. I'll give some to you.
Having a hard time. I'll tell you one thing, though, and it's not really a failure, but leaving Boston, I was only there 3 years, and I kind of regret that a little. But they wore me down. Oh, my God. The racism and the going to my office every day. I tell everybody, when I was first the superintendent, and I managed by wandering around. That's my style, and those of you who know me see me in the car barn and on the tracks, and that's how I work. And I would go in the mornings down to greet all my folks working on and I would hear all these, the black bitch is coming, or you would hear, and I never could figure out where it was coming from. And so after a while, and every night I go home, when I come in the next morning, there were obscenities on my door, and I had to, by the time I left, my door was like this when I went. By the time I left, it was really paper thin because they had shaved down my door every day. I had to take the obscenities off. So not a failure, but I think if I had stayed a little longer, I probably would have killed all the guys in the union, so it's probably just as good I left.
Longevity has its place. Liz.
I think the biggest gift is to be able to have informal power, and which doesn't depend on your title, because your title can always change. And an element of informal power for me was always being able to speak up and take what I would call little risks by offering a different viewpoint or, saying something that was provocative. And I found that if you do that on a regular basis, people do begin to listen to you, and you have very little, never thought it was a failure if they didn't listen, but it does distinguish you from other people who just accept what's happening. So I encourage you to do the sort of speaking up in an everyday way, and then when it comes to the big risks, you're all ready to do it.
Shirley.
Grace, I just thought about a risk that I took that really was gutsy.
It just took you a little bit longer because of all the
Yeah, right.
successes, right?
But one morning on the Green Line, we had a major problem that we had a woman got her arm caught in the door, and we dragged her for a few miles. And the chief mechanical officer called me and told me to take all the light rail cars off the line till I found out what the problem was. And so I did. I shut it down. And went home that night thinking about this problem and how we were going to resolve it. Next morning, I came in, I got all the guys together, and I said, we got this major problem, and how are we going to fix it? We sat down, looked at schematics and everything. We didn't solve it that day. I go home that night, and I get a call, and there's a man on the other end, and he says, I'll tell you what the problem is. He said, on the door, there's that spring, and the spring is clamped down too tight. We need to back off on that spring, and that'll solve all the problems. I'm like, hell, that's easy. This guy must be putting me on. So I thought about it. I'm driving to work the next day, and I'm like, do I go by what this guy said, or are they setting me up for failure here? So when I got in that morning, and my mother always taught me, people are very helpful. Sometimes they try to give you good advice. So that was saying, the other side of my brain was saying, they're setting you up. Do not listen to that. It was so simple. I didn't think it made sense. So when we got in the meeting that morning, I brought all the repairmen in, and I said, I think I know what the problem is. And I had a big mouth guy there. Yeah, she knows everything, blah, blah. So I'm telling them this thing, and they're laughing like hell because they're saying, that's ridiculous. So I sent Big Mouth down to fix it. He thought he was Jock on the block. I sent him to fix it. And I'm telling you, I was sweating. I probably lost 10 pounds that day. I'm sitting there. He comes back 20 minutes later, and he said, damn if it didn't work. And we fixed it, and I was like, phew. And when I left there, I never found out who that was. To this day, I don't know who gave me that tip, but he was trying to help me. So
Helping
thank
hands.
you wherever you are.
So I think my moral to the story, though, is if you don't stand up and you're not saying what you think, and you got to find an appropriate way to do it sometimes, whether you're speaking up for yourself or your people or someone else or an issue, if you don't stand up, then you begin to stoop, and you begin to just take it, and you begin to be this bland person that doesn't know how to speak up. You've got to develop courage. You try it a little bit. You heard Liz say just a little bit, but if you try it, you'll get better at it, and you may get a little smackdown once in a while. I've received many smackdowns, but you've got to keep trying. Otherwise, you're going to end your career like this. No one's going to know who you are. They're not going to call on you to help. It's going to be a boring career, and you're just going to turn into vanilla and kind of get by. If you participate and listen, you can't be a pig-headed person. You can't just think you're right all the time. Shirley did take a big risk, but that combination of risk and thinking that you owe the organization, they put you in that position for a reason, and you at least owe your boss your best advice. That's what I want out of my people, and if they don't give it to me and they're quiet, they're not doing their job, because something's going to happen. They're not going to speak up, and then the end result is going to be you made a decision without all the information on the table, and it makes for a lousy life. And I think you see successes up here because they've had the guts to stand up and do some things. Okay, well, let's do a little twist here. We're all managers, and we've all had a little bit of a tough time as women coming up through the industry. I want to just start with you, Dana. I'm going to read the first quote in the book from Dana, and it's just a short one. I knew that there were people that were LGBT and afraid. I decided that was not going to be me. Chris was not my wife at the time because marriage was not legal in our state, but from my first job, she came to all of the events. I had colleagues, including my supervisors, come to our home. That was really something that I was going to share, even if it meant losing my job. They were either going to fire me or I was going to inspire other people to be out and ashamed. She went on to say that she knew this because there were people in her community and at her church and at other events that were in the closet and not willing to come out. Women, race, people of color have had it bad all this time. I thought it was great that APTA hosted an LGBTQ event reception. But this is the issue that's coming today. We've been at this for 30 or 40 years on the women's issue. What advice have you got, Dan? I'll start with you, but what advice have you got for managers out there in trying to support people that are out? And if we don't know they're out, how do you create an environment so people feel comfortable being who they are?
Well, I think I attended one of the sessions here on insiders and outsiders that APTA had. And I know you had a general session about that I wasn't able to attend, and about how groups form and who's in charge and who has privilege and who doesn't. And I think that attending those types of events so that you begin to recognize the privilege that we all have. One of the reasons that Chris and I are often accepted, even 20 years ago, is that we had been formally married, and we had children, and so people don't see those as risky people to be around or bad people, and some of the things that keep us, that have been unfair prejudices towards the LGBT community through the history. And so that was a privilege that I had, even though now I'm very happy in the LGBT community. So I think that understanding that there are people that aren't comfortable, that the system, whatever it is, hasn't thought about what they are like, where families are. It's, we know now that you don't interview and ask people about their families. There's laws now that talk about that. Well, that applies to the LGBT community too. And so if you think that your managers meeting where spouses are invited, but you call them wives and husbands in states right now that really aren't honoring marriages for the LGBT community, you may be unintentionally making people feel like their spouse or partner isn't welcome just because of the words that you use. Instead of saying spouse or partner, you're saying husband or wife, that you're using those words which aren't yet accepted. We live in California now, Chris and I did, and I never thought that I would. I thought it was a crazy place. And we've been here 7 years and are very happy here in California. But we're very protected in the LGBT community because of the way California has gone. We were married here in 2008. But there still are 29 states that you can be fired as an LGBT community without legal protection.
Shirley, you and Mary have been managers. What is it you think we could do as managers to provide support there in some fashion?
I think it starts
get the best out of our employees, really.
Yeah, and it starts at the top too, and I think it has to be, I think the head of the agency has to make people, has to make sure that they're inclusive and understand the diversity and the human resource people. One of my complaints is sometimes you got the wrong people in the human resource departments. You need to have people who understand the culture, who understand diversity, who are more inclusive. And I think and that's why I say it starts at the top, because you've got to put the right people in the right jobs if you're trying to promote that culture throughout the organization of fairness and equity.
And Grace, I would say too that when I had the privilege of leading organizations, I would say to them, we want our organization to look like the public that we serve, to look like the whole cloth of the people that we exist here to serve. So making sure that you are inclusive, and Shirley, you're so right, getting the right hiring practices in place. Because if only a small group of people are always making hiring decisions, guess what? They're going to hire people that look like them, that sound like them. And so you have to bring diversity into that and celebrate that diversity. And another thing that a mentor told me is people won't care how much you know unless they know you care. So you have to know people on a personal basis. And Dana, as you said, you know, we're all people. At the end of the day, we're all people, and we can all contribute in different ways, and we shouldn't put people into silos and exclude them ever, ever, ever if we're going to represent the public that we serve at the end of the day.
So, Elizabeth, anything to add?
No.
Okay.
No. Maybe.
It was very fun writing the book with Liz. Let's move on. You're managers there, but you're also mothers. Everyone on the stage is a mother, has kids. Let's talk about a conflict, because we always get this question from the audience. And I will pause in just a minute. I'll ask one more question, this one, and then if there are questions from the audience, you're going to have to shout them out, but I'll take them up here, try and recite them and give them. I have plenty of questions to keep going here, but if the audience wants to participate, I'd love to take some of those questions. So,
Grace, I'd love to start on this, because I think it's really important, and often we are conflicted about pulling at home, family, you know, things that are going on at home versus your career. And I like to say to women that I have the privilege of mentoring, you can do it all. You just may not be able to do it all at once. And you have to make choices at different stages of your life. When my kids were really young, I wasn't out there in a career where I traveled and did a lot of different things as well. But like I said, the second I got that youngest into first grade, which was all day then, because kindergarten wasn't all day back then I was able to then start taking on more opportunities. And fortunately, I had a family that was very supportive and allowed me to do that. But I think that you have to see where you are in life at a different point in time and decide what's more important to you. And I think, as Dana said and others, it's okay to take a hiatus. It's okay to step out and do something that's important to you for a period of time, and then have the ability to come back into your career and do things you want to do. So my niece had a baby just around the 4th of July, and she's a teacher. And so she's back, she has to go back to school now and leave that baby and go back to school, and it's really tough for her. And I've said, Nikki, you made great arrangements for little Eli to be taken care of while you're at work. So go back, see how it feels. If at the end of this school year you just really feel like it's not working out, then you decide something differently. But give it a shot. You've got a great caregiver. Just give it a shot. And we're all here for you. We'll support you. We'll pray for you. We'll make sure that you do well with that. So make the choice that's good for you and your family at a given point in time. And the other thing I would say is, fortunately, our partners are much more willing to step up and do things. You know, there was a time where my husband's idea of helping was to lay on the couch and tell the kids to get up and help me. You know, so that's not the way it is anymore. I think our partners are much more helpful today.
Shirley?
I'm the worst one talking about personal. I've had a very professional, great career. Personal relationship, I failed miserably. I have 2 sons.
That are not delinquents.
They're
very
what?
Professional. I mean, they're very
One's 55 and one's 60. So I have 2 sons. My oldest son is very successful. He's a vice president at Sikorsky Helicopters. My other one has his own flooring company. And I had 2 husbands, one African American, one Italian, so I've done it both. Divorced. I have a beautiful ring here called the Husbands with both of their diamonds on it. So I respect them dearly. But my career really was very, very important to me, and to the detriment probably of my personal life. But I survived, and I live on my 5 pensions. I'm going to be okay.
Liz?
Yeah. I had a working, my dad died when I was 6, and my mother worked actually as a lawyer. And I found that very, very helpful in terms of my own motivation to work. So I had a real role model. So I do encourage people who are struggling with work family to go find someone who, you know, really worked that you admired and worked through it, because they can be very helpful to you in making you understand that you can raise and love children and do it well, and you can also do your work well. And I always put my kids first, I believe.
There's a microphone at the front if someone would like to ask a question. Anyone want to? Okay, I'm going to ask the next one. If you can show yourself up front, if you have the guts to do it, I might give you a free book if someone. Actually, we're going to run out of time here in just a minute anyway. But so I want to ask you each, what would you have done differently in your career? And I don't know if it's knowing what you know now, but just looking back on your career, what would you have done differently?
Grace, let me jump in here. I think what I would have done differently is given women more of an opportunity. And I think one of the big mistakes I made in my career was not promoting a woman who had worked with me, and she was being interviewed. I was the boss of this position. She was being interviewed to be an assistant manager in the area, and she said to me, Mary, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can do this. So I selected someone else, and I've often thought what a mistake that was, because Susie was ready. I knew she could do the job. I knew she had the ability to do the job, and I felt that I didn't help and encourage her and give her enough confidence. And like you said, sometimes you take that job and you go home that night and go, what the hell have I done? And pretty soon they're going to find out that I'm not smart enough to do this job, and they're going to kick me the heck out of there. But to have given her the confidence to have really stepped up and said, okay, you can do this, and had her step up and do that job. So that's one of the regrets that I have, that it took me a while to learn that lesson, to help see other people's capabilities in them so clearly that they can see them in themselves.
Okay, we have some people lined up, so I'm going to pause right there to take the question. Go ahead.
In part, I think that this is somewhat generational. I have young men who work with me, as well as young women who work with me, and they face these conflicts now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe it's generational. I'm in your generation, and knowing the experiences that women encountered, hopefully young women are not going to be subject to the kind of things that our generation was subject to. But maybe you could say something about the young men also who are experiencing these family tensions. They want childcare, and the expectations on them are that they're not going to want flex time, or they're not going to want part-time, or things like that. So
Anna,
maybe
do you want to
could
take that?
Sure. I'm really glad you brought that up, because these are family issues. Our personal lives are our family, and however those families are defined, whether it's your mother helping out with your children, right, or it's my partner and my wife, or husbands, or the collected family around. These are family things, and the families all have their own. Husbands have their jobs, wives have their jobs, grandmothers have their jobs. They're all working together. And so we as business leaders need to understand that this isn't a woman's issue. This is a family issue, and provide that support, not have this drive a culture that is exceptional, but not exceptional at the expense of people's lives and their family around them, whether it's the men or women. Set great examples for time for yourself, so that your employees will see that there is time for your family also in their lives.
Please, question.
Well, good morning. I just have a statement. I'll be very brief. I am Richard Enty with the Metro RTA in Akron, Ohio, the executive director. And I just want to say thank you to all the women in this industry, because I am here where I am because of a lot of female mentors that I've had. So continue to keep us men in mind.
Thank
Good.
you.
Absolutely.
We do. Thank you.
Grace, we're like the Marine Corps. We believe that there are a few good men out there.
The last question will be, though I can't see from here, but in the one in Chartreuse, what appears to be Chartreuse from here. And then we're going to close. Go ahead, please.
Great, thank you. So hi, Candace Sue from San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. Thank you all for being here and for having this session. I think it's really important. That's something that we're trying to do at SFMTA to bring women forward. And I have a question for you, which is, I was recently at a session where someone from a major engineering firm stood up at a session at Women in Transportation and said, there is no gender bias any longer in this industry, and that women have the same opportunity as everyone else, and that he truly believed that, and that people who are talented will get ahead no matter what. And I would like to hear your reaction to that, and what you might say back to someone in the industry who thinks that gender bias simply doesn't exist any longer.
So the book was put out a year ago,
Yeah.
and everything has changed in that year, so
Yeah.
he's absolutely correct.
But Grace,
Anna?
I'd love to
Yeah.
take a shot at that.
Yeah.
I would ask him, what does your senior management team look like? What
Right.
does your board of directors
Right.
look like?
Right.
How is your company structured that you believe that we've had it made? Because frankly, the data does not support that at all. And it's better, don't get me wrong, it's a lot better than it has been in the past. But I can remember with Jane Garvey at an ASHTO
Right.
meeting some years back, there was no line at the ladies' room. None. In fact, we offered to watch the doors so the guys wouldn't have to stand in line at the men's room because my parity will occur when there are lines at both bathrooms
Right.
when we go to conferences. But ask those questions. What does
Yeah,
your
right.
management team look like? What does your board look like? Help me understand why you think that parity is existing today.
Great metric, Mary.
Right.
Yeah.
One other, we good? Next question.
I'm usually a wonderful public speaker. My heart's about to beat out of my chest with this question comment. As 20 years ago, when I went to get my first job, I found out after I was hired that the reason I was hired was because I was a thin young thing with sexy legs and I had a skirt that was just above my knees. In that job, being very young, in my 20s, proceeded to be sexually harassed. And it affected me for a very long time. And I was told later in my mid-30s, sexual harassment no longer exists, that's a thing of the past. Recently, I had a young employee come to me who I hired who expressed concern because she was now the pretty young thing, and she was starting to feel that there was some pressure from men of a more sexual nature. And I had to try and mentor her through that. So I'm up here to ask for your comments on that and also to bring awareness that is still an issue in this industry.
Absolutely.
Liz,
And
if you want to
your comments.
start?
Well, I'm sad to hear it, but I know it exists. And I think the training of what happens in any of the agencies and in private companies has to take place, and it needs to be absolute no harassment, regardless of male and female, whoever you are.
Shirley,
Yeah,
and then
and
Mary.
I think we just need to really emphasize that is not okay. That is not okay at all. And it has to, again, Shirley, you talked about starting things at the top. It has to be from the very top of the organization. That's not okay. And by the way, it's not okay for women to harass young men in the job either. You know, it is just not okay. And when that happens, we have to call it out and take steps to correct it and train and educate people. And either they can change or we can change them, because we just simply cannot tolerate that. I mean, the stories that are in the news today of what has happened, you know, and devastating lives the way it is just simply not okay. We don't have to tolerate that. We won't tolerate that.
Thank you.
I think that's a good point too, but I also think that it starts at the top. So you really need to have some training in your organization as to that. I also want to say to young women, and I mentor a lot of women. We women need to dress for success. Sometimes we don't always wear what we should wear to work, and I think that's important. I mean, sexual harassment should never happen anywhere, but let's not help them along. Let's dress professionally and respect each other.
So that from a wise, experienced manager. What I would like to do right now, first of all, let's thank the panel for their great insights. And now I'd like to invite to the stage Liz Levin, my partner in the book, just to tell you a little bit about the book. Liz?
Great.
I'll take it to you.
Yeah.
Good job, Grace.
2 years and 3/4 ago, there was no book, and there certainly weren't discussions like this. And it was about that time I got a call from Grace about whether I'd be interested to do a book with her. And I, of course, said yes. And this has been a wonderful partnership that we've had. I can tell you a lot about it, but Grace didn't give me very much time. So I will tell you that now we have a book, and we have book sales, and we have book tours, and that is far beyond anything we envisioned. And it's somewhat like the careers of these women Their careers are beyond anything they envisioned. And I think that's probably true for many of you in the audience, that you started someplace and now it's someplace even more special than what you had thought about. Our book has always been not about our own stories, but it's been in relationship to all of you. And it's you who buy the books, it's you who read the books and think about your own history and your own career with respect to the book, and it's you who are sharing the books with others. So we thank you a lot for that. The book, at its essence, is about the turn that many of you will have. And that turn is that you will be shaping the future of transportation. And if you look around, the challenges, from whether they're automated vehicles to climate change, are many, and it needs all of your talent. So we look to you to hope that you take your special gifts, that you carve out your own special path, as each of us has here, and that you really move forward to solve those challenges in a way which is different and new and very, very satisfying. So we left our last chapter unfinished, and we say it's unfinished because we want your stories, and we look forward to your stories and their continuing the magic and the power that we found within our book. So thank you for all that. You can get on each of your tables underneath the bread plate is a free book ticket or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's there, and also we will be selling and signing books outside, and I urge you, even if you have one, to get one for people that you care for. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Not every bread plate has a free ticket, but Lynn so nicely put some there. So there are about 50 books that will be free, and you can come up to talk to Lynn, who's up here, if you have one of those coupons. We're very grateful to Doran for the idea, and to Janet and to Parsons for hosting us today, and to Lynn for all her work. So let's thank everybody for a fun session this morning. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Nice job. Beautiful. All right. Thanks, kid. You did a great job.
Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join our closing session that starts at 10:30. The closing APTA annual meeting general session will start at 10:30. Thank you.